Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and welcome to the Police Accountability Report. As I never get tired of saying, this show has a single purpose, holding the politically powerful institution of policing accountable. And one of the ways we do that is not just by focusing on the behavior of individual cops, but scrutinizing the system which makes bad policing possible. And today we're going to do that by sharing a troubling interview we conducted with a woman who blew the whistle on the questionable tactics of a specialized drug unit. What she told us about how they tried to enlist her to press charges against the chief of police of a small town who was fighting back against the drug war speaks volumes about the systemic problems with policing today. But before I get started, I want you watching to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct or brutality, we might be able to investigate. Please reach out to me directly at Tejas Baltimore on Twitter or Facebook, and please like, share, and comment on our videos. I do read your comments and appreciate them, and I try to answer your questions whenever I can. Now, as we've often highlighted on this show, one of the most troubling facets of American policing has been the decades-long war on drugs. The so-called battle against substances which alter the mind is in part the root cause of the country's addiction to mass incarceration, militarized policing, and a justice system fueled by the spoils of illegal confiscated property. It's a litany of ills that we have continued to expose on the show, and the reason we do it is to make this important point. The war on drugs continues despite public pushback because it's a big business. I mean, let's not forget our interview with former Drug Task Force Supervisor Neil Franklin, which we revealed on PAR last year. The since retired drug commander has been an outspoken critic of the war on drugs, but he's also been honest about the underlying imperative which drives it. Let's listen.
You see a lot of money, you see a lot of cash. It's a lot of money, it's a lot of cars, motorcycles, homes, boats, you name it. And there's no direct accountability over top of that. And a lot of times we were deciding upon what car to go after or what target to go after, what person to go after. We were making that decision upon the value of their assets. We do financial workups on people, and that's how we would target a lot of these folks.
The point is, the profit model of policing is at the heart of so many of the problems that beset law enforcement today. It's a fusion of the worst aspects of crony capitalism with the immense power of law enforcement, which has forged arguably the destructive justice system we all live with today. And the interview you are about to see sheds even more light on this thesis. What it reveals is so disturbing. Stephen and I actually built a documentary around the story itself, which has just been released nationally. But today, we are also airing for the first time parts of that interview that have, until this point, remained secret, never seen by the public. But before I get to what this person told us about the tactics of a notorious drug unit, let me set the stage a bit first. This story begins in a small town on Maryland's Lower Eastern Shore called Pocomoke. It's a city equally divided between black and white residents. In 2011, they appointed their first black police chief, Kelvin Sewell. Sewell, a former Baltimore City homicide detective, took the job and immediately started implementing community policing. Specifically, he told his officers to get out of their car and walk among the residents. Let's listen to some of those residents talk about it.
Because before he came here, all you saw was just about every weekend, the Worcester County Task Force coming into town, grabbing up all these kids and taking them to Snow Hill, processing them, putting them in jail.
During his tenure, crime dropped dramatically. Relations between the community and police improved, and most of all, people started to trust law enforcement, but looming over his success was the unreasonable thirst of the drug war. Specifically, the Worcester County Drug Task Force, which was accustomed to regularly raiding the poorest part of Pocomoke and hauling off residents to the county jail. But the chief fought back. Not only did he not want the highly paid drug warriors in his town, he tried to help the people caught up in their ever-widening net. He helped get drug treatment for people who wanted help. He also helped young men who worked on the corners get back into school. But in 2015, Sewell was fired. And for more on that and what we learned while we were investigating the case, I'm joined by my reporting partner, Stephen Janis. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us.
Taya, thanks for having me.
Now, first, Chief Sewell was fired. Can you talk about why this happened and what unfolded as we investigated? What went on behind the scenes?
Well, first of all, let me say full disclosure, I wrote a book with Kelvin when he was a homicide detective in Baltimore. But what went on behind the scenes was power structure of this town really trying to take Kelvin down. And really it was a struggle between the Worcester County Drug Task Force and Kelvin, who was running the town, who wanted to implement more community-style policing, while the Worcester County Drug Task Force wanted to come in and arrest people. And it was really a battle between two forms of policing that the public wasn't seeing.
So as we were working on the case, you got a tip that someone in the community wanted to talk about law enforcement in Worcester County. What was it, and what did she have to say?
Well, after Kelvin filed a lawsuit, claiming wrongful termination, we started hearing rumors that the state prosecutor was investigating him in sort of concert with Worcester County officials to try to get him, basically. And then we get this call from a woman who had been caught up in some drug raids, who had some amazing stuff to tell us, that really they've been trying to get him for years. And she basically said they've been trying to get her to lie on him and say whatever they could do to take him down, because they wanted to go into that community and prosecute drug raids, bottom line.
Now, before I play the interview, I wanted to get your thoughts on what you learned. What does it tell you about law enforcement and the war on drugs?
It tells me that law enforcement is a business, and if you threaten that business, they'll come after you. And unfortunately, instead of being like a competitive world where you're competing against business down the street, this business has the tools of law enforcement. They can arrest you, they can charge you, they can dirty you up, they can drag you into court, they can do all sorts of horrible things to you that, another business might not be able to do. So that's what makes policing for profit such a fraught concept, and the war on drugs an utter failure.
So now on to the interview. As Stephen told us, her name is Jerry Fitch. She was a resident of Pocomoke who had battled addiction and was subsequently swept up in several of the raids by the aforementioned drug unit. But it's what she revealed about how the officers acted behind the scenes after she was in custody that we felt compelled to share. Let's listen to her set the scene.
While they were conducting the search of the house, sheriffs took me to the side and began to question me about if I knew anything that they were doing crooked, as far as Chief Sewell and Green and Savage.
Now, the first intriguing detail she shared with us is that efforts to criminalize Sewell started in 2012.
What kind of questions were they asking?
Asking if they had ever solicited me for sex, asking if I knew of anything that they were doing.
So what did you say to them?
That neither one of them had ever solicited me for sex. And I didn't know of anything they were doing wrong.
And what did they say after you said?
Are you sure? I know that was repeated about 5 times. And because one hand can wash the other. That was the main thing that stuck in my head, was that one hand can wash the other.
What did they mean by that?
Because I was going to be charged with possession of CDS. Well, I was subsequently charged with possession of CDS.
Why didn't I'm wondering, it could have been an easy way out for you. Why didn't you take it?
Because it wasn't true.
Then, roughly 2 years later, they try again to get her to lie and accuse Sewell of crimes.
So then when is the next time they asked you?
June 22nd, 2015.
That was another raid, or was
Yeah, and it was at it was actually like an undercover drug distribution investigation that just the sheriff's department and Maryland State troopers were conducting. They purposely left Pocomoke City Police Department out of it. He went on to say, asking me questions if me and Chief Sewell had ever been involved in a sexual relationship. No. If I had ever done any work with Chief Sewell. No. If I knew of anything that they were doing that wasn't right.
And then, in 2016, after Sewell was fired, 2 investigators from the Office of the State Prosecutor visited her in jail, and they made an astounding offer. Let's listen.
I'm in my cell, and they called me out for, they just said I needed to go to processing. And they took me out of one building into they call it administration building. Then again, they said, it was an urban myth that I was supposedly pregnant by Chief Sewell when I was arrested, which I wasn't.
They said it was an urban myth?
Yeah, that's exactly how they said it. I don't think it's fair to me for them to have targeted me to try to find dirt on him. I don't think that was fair. Don't get me wrong. I didn't want to go to jail. I didn't want to go to prison. but I wasn't going to drag anybody else into it. It was my charge.
So here you can see a startling example of how corrupting the war on drugs is. First, you have a chief who tries to transform policing by connecting with the people he serves, a man who forced his officers to build relationships with the community, a cop who sought productive solutions in lieu of jails, courts, and confinement. But then the political economy of policing intervened. That is, Chief Sewell tried to stop the endless prosecution of the drug warder, whose concerted efforts he believed were undermining his efforts to heal the community and actually provide public safety. And finally, when his strategy actually succeeded, he found himself the victim of concerted efforts to criminalize him. It's an extraordinary look behind the scenes of the drug war that reveals all the worst aspects of this battle fought in the communities and the homes of the people who can least afford it. I mean, we talk about police being heroes, but isn't the true hero of this story Jerry Fitch? The person police continued to target for incarceration and would probably like for most of us to forget. It was Fitch who, when facing incarceration and imprisonment, refused and turned down an offer to cooperate for leniency. And it was Fitch, when she was already in jail, who declined to offer false information that would have allowed her to walk free. I mean, really, how many of us would not readily make that trade? Would we have the courage to stay behind bars rather than tell a few lies in exchange for our freedom? But of course, the real problem is that Fitch faced that choice at all. What is truly troubling is that the imperative of the drug war demanded that she confront such a treacherous dilemma. The bottom line is that they wanted her to lie, to incriminate an innocent man, all so they could keep making arrests that accomplish little more than putting people behind bars. It's worth noting that the Worcester County Drug Task Force are among the highest paid cops in the area. An investigative report by Delmar Ronau revealed that the officers of this so-called elite unit earned on average salaries over $100,000, and they were also the biggest recipients of overtime. And for what? So they could storm into poor communities, hauling out people addicted to substances wrought by the despair of the failures of a crony capitalist system. I mean, the neighborhood where highly paid cops looked to drum up business was already beset by poverty, a community that had few resources and even less political efficacy. Why not pick on it? And along the way, pick up some good stats and a whole bunch of overtime. Why not pad your salary and get a free vehicle while contributing to the great American incarceration machine? Why not add to the misery of a city where a chief offered the hope of something better than a pair of handcuffs? I mean, if the war on drugs was so righteous and so necessary, why would you have to resort to suborning perjury from a witness? Why, if arresting poor people with few prospects was so productive, would you have to enlist those same people to incriminate your critics? This is a classic example of the political economy we often talk about on this show. The connection between money and policing, cash and law enforcement that we try to expose whenever we can. And it is a dangerous symbiosis, a malignant abuse of power, and most of all, as we've seen in this case firsthand, the imperative for police corruption. Which is why we will continue to bring you stories like this, to shed light on the truth and expose those who would undermine it, particularly if they wear a badge and carry a gun. And by the way, if you're interested in watching the full documentary, you can click on a link we pinned to the top of the story. I would like to thank Stephen Janis for his reporting, writing, and editing on this piece. Stephen, thank you so much for your help.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And of course, I have to thank friend of the show, Noli D, for her support. Thanks, Noli D. And I want you watching to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct or brutality, please share it with us and we might be able to investigate. Please reach out to us. You can email us tips privately at par@therealnews.com and share your evidence of police misconduct. You can also message us at Police Accountability Report on Facebook or Instagram, or at Eyes on Police on Twitter. And of course, you can always message me directly at Tejas Baltimore on Twitter or Facebook. And please like, share, and comment. I do read your comments and appreciate them, and they do help. My name is Taya Graham, and I'm your host of the Police Accountability Report. Please be safe out there.